new attendees to CoBUG. Great. A few faces I do recognize. I'm not great with names, so keep coming and I'll get it eventually. If not, just give me a kick in the head or something. Our presentation tonight is on VR. So does everybody know what VR stands for? Virtual reality. You also have augmented reality or AR. What's that? Mixed reality. Mixed reality. So we're going to go through just a PowerPoint presentation, and then what we want to do is kind of demonstrate how we're actually using it in-house, and then we invite you to come up and participate also. So no worries, what happens in the training room with the VR goggles on stays in the training room. And here we'll be very good at editing any embarrassing information out of the video that gets posted. No worries there.
Blur some faces.
So, we'll go ahead and start off now. If you have any questions, please let us know. It's meant to be interactive and informative. Again, thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, and we're going to go very informal here. So at any point, if you have a question, just yell it out. We'll do our best to make sure we answer it. If not today, we got cards up here. You guys can always reach out. If you have questions down the road, you guys are fired up your own stuff, or just want to get through this thing. Questions, let us know. That's what these things are all about. If you struggle through it, we're all kind of in this together in the industry, so we're all learning from each other. Us getting together makes us all better. So keep it going for sure.
MS Consultants, we've got 9 offices in 5 states, a little over 350 people. It's intern season, so that number fluctuates, and nobody really knows.
Multidisciplinary.
We're multidisciplinary. We've got architecture, engineering, transportation, utilities, civil, structural, pretty much all of them. So we do most everything in-house. We don't collaborate a whole lot with outside companies, but that's
Kind of a luxury that we have is a little bit unusual. I've been here a little over a year and a half. Dom's been here, what, 9, 8, 9?
10 week was last week. 10 years.
10 years.
And then 2 years before that, but I guess it was 10.5. As you said, intern season. So about 2 years ago, well, no, more than that. About 3 years ago, we started looking into the idea of elevating our renderings, essentially. And I noticed that the Autodesk 360 platform will allow you to do 360 panoramic renderings. And that was kind of like the flashbulb for me. Like, well, this is cool. What else is out there? Let's keep this going. Started with that. The natural focus for that would be the Google Cardboard, which you can see there's a couple of these floating around. Flash forward a year past that, we purchased the HTC Vive, which was our real first deep dive into the VR world. And then we also looked at a handful of other things, including like the Windows mixed reality and the Oculus from, I think Facebook owns them now. Ultimately, the workflow funneled into the Cardboard, Windows mixed reality, and primarily we'll kind of hit on each of those, what each of those means for us and how we can use those to our advantage. So the first being the Google Cardboard. Pros for this platform, it's very cost effective. I think you can buy a pre-assembled cardboard for like $15, and you can buy it unassembled for 10. Save yourself $5 and put it together. You can buy a whole bunch of branded and get them in different shapes and sizes. I've seen some that are small, compact case. Anybody remembers these? They can be mailed. So they're really portable, easy, cost-effective, yet intro level. I call it light. And that's part of the cons, is that it is light. It's not rich. It's a little bit lower quality. Now you can do some more work by joining a bunch of static scenes together. Start putting in more work, and things shift. So
typically, what you get is a static panorama. You can pan around and get the 3D effect, but it isn't an interactive. You can't really walk through it. in the same sense.
Yeah. They're a little less comfortable for sure. It's a piece of cardboard that you're shoving into your face. And it runs off of your cell phone. So the quality of your cell phone has an impact on the experience that you're going to get. Although any modern day cell phone has such a high resolution that it's actually probably better than the headsets that you would put on. I found for mine that my cell phone screen is so scratched up though, that putting it on is terrible. So I would never recommend somebody use my phone. By all means, use your own. So it's probably going to be a way better experience. Windows mixed reality. These are actually really good headsets. They are a much higher quality experience. You're going to get a full 6 degrees of freedom VR experience. They're a little bit better price competitively for the hardware wise. They will, they travel a lot better. They are tethered to the computer, which is a little bit of a con in that you don't get a whole lot of freedom. You get as long as the cord is. But if you're sitting at your desk, it's a good resource for that manner. So you can grab it off the shelf, sit at your desk, throw it on, check it out, and put it back kind of thing. So they're really good for that kind of workflow. Ultimately, most of the work that we've been doing centers around the Vive. It is probably the highest quality experience that I've seen. Another very intriguing aspect was the wireless aspect. About, I want to say maybe a year ago, maybe a little less, they came out with the wireless component that adds onto the back, which takes the cords out, which for us was way, way better. It's so much easier to put other people into experience and not have to kind of stand behind them and make sure they don't trip. Takes the safety hazard out of it a little bit.
What those cubes are doing basically are creating an infrared cage, essentially with lines of boundaries. So as you have the goggles on and you approach the edges of it, you start to see the blue edge, so you don't walk into objects. Kind of like the Ghost or Daredevil in the rain. You see just a hint of what's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you go back one real quick? Some of the cons that we experienced with the Vive, just to make sure that we're covering all the bases here. It is less portable. Our setup here, you can see, is permanently installed. The headset, or the cubes can be mounted on tripods, which was how we would typically do this before. But we made the decision once it went wireless to go ahead and just go full in, and it's permanently installed in this space. The wireless aspect also runs off of a card that goes in the computer that is not compatible with a laptop at this time, which was kind of disappointing when we pulled it out of the box, but fingers crossed, maybe that gets better. It's also going to be more expensive. Now we've had our headset for about 2 years, and in that 2-year time frame, there have been countless other headsets that have all come to market at varying ranges of quality and cost. The Vive itself, there's a pro version now. I know in like a month or maybe next quarter, I think they're coming out with the Vive Pro Eye that actually has focal tracking to track where your iris is looking in the headset to increase the quality of whatever you're focused on, which is mind-blowing. So this stuff is ramping up dramatically in both cost and quality. And in between, all these manufacturers are also sprinkling in hardware that hits a content field that fits somewhere in between all of that. I threw this slide up here kind of quickly. I'm not going to read this. This is all boring stats. It's more or less for you to go back to after the fact. This is all taken straight from each of the manufacturers' websites, just to kind of put it out there. The Windows mixed reality will actually operate in 2 different stages. They call it standard and ultra. The standard has a lower refresh rate. And the reason that I stop and kind of hover on that is because if you're going to try and hook up a headset to a lower end workstation and it doesn't operate at 90 frames per second or 90 hertz, 90 is that butter zone. Anything lower than 90, you start running the risk of motion sickness. And it's real. I've seen it. It's not great. So it'll do it, but I wouldn't recommend it at all. It can be rough. Yeah. So a couple of the means in which we've been using this technology. One of the heavy components has been reality capture. We own a couple different means of doing this technology. We own a 360 camera, point and shoot, real easy, real simple. We own a couple 3D laser scanners. So we started collecting all that data. We figured, well, there's got to be a way to view all this 3D data. So we spent some time focused on that. We got a drone. We fly the drone, same thing, point clouds, got to figure out a way to get all that data in there. And those are some of the things that we've been doing. So reality capture has been a big proponent for us in re-visualizing all this data that we're collecting. 360 camera, there's a whole bunch out there. I know we own a Ricoh Theta. I don't remember the exact version because I saw the other day that they have a handful of them. But they're very nice, real easy, point and shoot. Just pop it up in the air. And the image that you actually see in the background here was taken from the camera itself. The images can be viewed, posted on a website. I know their software lets you upload it to, they have a cloud platform that you can kind of host things in if that's easy for you. It's real quick, it's real easy. Those images can also be processed in a whole bunch of different software to let you view them in headsets, Google Cardboard. It's easy, it's cheap. I think the cameras range in cost from a couple $100 into maybe like $1,000 range. So they're at varying price points per quality too. 3D scanning. Is everybody here familiar with 3D scanning? A lot of good nods. Okay, I won't spend too much time focused on that if you already know what it is, which is good. We do a lot of 3D scanning. We've been scanning for at least 7 years that I know about. And so we have years worth of data. We reuse it all the time. And we want to get clients more familiar with their own data. So VR was a natural workflow for us to be able to let people experience their spaces and their point clouds again in VR. With regards to VR software, we sat and we tried a whole bunch of different things, and we broke it down from what are we going to feed it and what do we want to get back out of it. So here are, this isn't even the whole list. These are probably the biggest ones that we've tried, probably ones that most people are familiar with, the higher end rendering and graphical applications here. And these are the ones that we ultimately spent the most time and kind of focused our workflows around. So we use Iris VR. They make 2 products, Prospect, which is their VR platform, and then they have Scope, which is a mobile platform which runs on Android and iOS devices. It will allow you to upload 360 panoramas to view in the Google Cardboards or on a mobile phone from anywhere. It's a nice, simplistic platform that you can take with you anywhere you go. And the Prospect application is one of the programs that we'll jump into in a little bit. Enscape is a rendering application that runs in Revit, SketchUp, and I believe Rhino as well. It's a very quick, real-time rendering application that produces really high-end results that as soon as we saw it, we're like, yep, we're gonna keep doing that. That one's good. The Autodesk 360 platform, which is, like I said in the beginning, one of the places that we started. It's cloud-based, so you can upload Revit models. You can do static renderings, 360 panoramas. You can output Google Cardboard.
There is a little bit of obviously a lag time as you have to wait for it to be processed in the cloud and get the results back. There's a little bit of adjustability after you get it back. Generally, it's kind of a trial and error. It's points based on your subscription.
Yeah.
You may get so many included points.
It's definitely also worth mentioning too that the A360 platform is credit-based. So the quality that you want out of it is dependent on the credits that you put into it. You can run it at 0 credits and get kind of like a preview version, which is actually pretty decent for a preview, which is free. So there are some cards in front of you guys. There are QR codes in the tops one with the A360 logo and one with the Enscape logo. The scenes that you see on the paper, I've rendered as 360 panoramas, so you can scan it with your phone and get kind of a comparison for those. I'll just tell you that the A360 ones were done at free credit, just so you can kind of see what that baseline no cost input looks like. The quality goes up from there. Pharaoh's scene, which was in the bottom of the last slide, is the 3D scanning software that we use to stitch from our Pharaoh scanner. The later versions of that program actually have a plugin that allow you to do VR demonstrations straight out of Scene. It even is available in the Scene Lite, which is the free version of Scene. So not everybody needs a license of the full-blown expensive Scene. As long as it's been processed in the full version, anybody can have that VR experience. No, so the A360 renderings are actually hosted on the A360 site. The link will take you directly to that. You can choose to make the renderings public or private. These ones I've made public, so you should be able to scan it and jump right into them. Enscape is very similar. Their site hosts the renderings. I believe there's not a choice to make them public or private, though. I think they're all.
You should just be able to use your camera app, and it will go to that link.
Yes. Yeah, they should be available, or they should be viewable on any mobile platform. You can also click it as a hyperlink, like through an email, or actually this is a PDF, and embedded in the PDF is a hyperlink on the QR code. So you can click it, and it'll just open on a web page. You can use your mouse to kind of pan.
Image for the Google Cardboard essentially will bring up just a single panorama. Then there's a little Google Cardboard icon. You can click on that, and then you load it into the Cardboard to actually see it.
Yeah, I believe. So if you hold it in portrait, you can kind of pan and rotate your body around, and it uses the gyroscope to orient you. And it will also, if you turn it horizontal, but once you turn it horizontal, you get the option to go into the Google Cardboard. Gaming engines. VR kind of got its roots in the video game industry. So naturally, the video game engines of the world are very far along in the development of the content. AEC having now, these industries having now taken such an interest in producing so much content in the VR world, these gaming engines are catching up. They're seeing the market, they're putting their resources into products that tie into design platforms. So Unreal Engine has Datasmith, which will take your BIM data out of Revit and bring it into Unreal Engine as assets, which allow you to do VR demonstrations where you can actually extract BIM information straight out of the model when you're doing the experience. Twinmotion was a company that Unreal Engine just purchased. If you're looking to try stuff out, Twinmotion is free for use until I think November. If anybody's familiar with Lumion, it's very, very similar to Lumion. It offers a VR option as well to make your modeled content visible in a VR environment. You could do things like animated people, cars, live weather, moving objects. It's pretty cool. And it's free for a while, so now's the time to try it at least. The Unity platform, last year at Autodesk University, they announced that they have a partnership with Autodesk. The Unity Reflect is what they're coming up with here. And this is a tie-in with Revit that allows you to upload Revit modeled content and then visualize it in Unity. As you make your changes in Revit, those content changes are loaded back into Unity. So your model in your VR environment or your gaming engine, essentially, whatever you choose to do with it, is constantly being updated along the way. Whereas right now, and pretty much historically, it's a one-time push, do all your work and hope to God nobody changes it. Autodesk also offers 3ds Max Interactive, which I know I talked to a couple of people who said that they're using that. Not sure what's going to happen with that with Unity jumping into the mix, but we played with it a little bit. The gaming engines for us proved to be a lot of added work. They're very capable and they produce very good results, but at the cost of labor. So you had to put in a lot of work to get a high quality experience. We were looking for more couple click, let's do it, and then probably do it again, couple clicks, do it again, as opposed to let's spend a whole lot of time and get this really high polished experience that way.
What the gaming engines allow you to do basically is just really maximize the polygon. Instead of a building that you're rendering live, it's doing basically the whole city, doing these huge gaming environments. So that's where the advantage for gaming engines are. They've got a lot of work to optimize the code to be responsive. And both tracks are looking for ways to make that link between the rendering model much stronger and much easier, because you had to literally go through some other steps in order to get something that is output. It's not a direct link. Once you break it from Revit, then it was its own entity. We're trying to work in a way that allows bidirectional associativity. They're not quite there yet, but stuff is advancing pretty rapidly.
Yeah, you can definitely see that they've taken the interest, and it's definitely coming along. So these were our experiences. By all means, this is not a fully inclusive list. These are the things that we tested and found our value in. So I mean, you can pretty easily see here that Iris VR checked a lot of the boxes for us. So that was a natural progression. Enscape offered a really high quality rendered experience. So us doing a lot of graphical presentation type things, that was a very important component for us. Revit Live, if you have the AEC collection, is a really great tool. It's a couple clicks, uploads to the cloud, actually runs it through Max Interactive. It just does the work for you on their end, and then you get a package back that you can run as a standalone experience and then also take that into VR. It's really good. Max Interactive, I only put this one line on here, but this experience for us was almost all of those gaming engines. We played with each of them a little bit, and we found that they're all capable of doing everything that we would want to do. But like I said, you had to put the work into it. And for us, it was more than we're willing to put in at this point in time. They're on the back burner is more or less where they're at for us.
So on this one, we're starting to talk about mixed and augmented reality. What you have here is HoloLens. Then for the construction industry, Trimble has a headset of their own. You can start to see where items like conduit and piping and things that would be concealed above a ceiling or behind chipboard on a wall can start to be visible. So it has applications in facilities maintenance and facilities management as well. In this example down in the bottom left, you're looking at more of a kind of a virtual reality desktop and applications that you can drag with your finger and eye tracking. And then we saw some videos of examples where some bricklayers were trying to create a wavy parametric design with brick, and using the HoloLens, the designer basically came up with a template that they could use, and with the goggles on, they can see where each brick needs to go, and they were able to basically lay it in one pass in just a few hours, as opposed to trial and error and eyeballing everything. So that was a pretty unique video for that application. And then Hyperform, we saw a video of this where it's more of a VR desktop and video conferencing type of application, where the person that's seated with his behind the camera essentially has a wall of models and notes and calendar things, and he receives an invite from this person standing there in front of him to do a video conference, and they talk about this model. So he kind of places it virtually onto the desktop. They add some trees live, and it populates with the trees. And then he actually creates it as a kind of a virtual environment, and it populates all the buildings in the background. So that was kind of a really neat demonstration of that. And just people that are thinking about where this technology can go as a next step as it continues to advance. That's pretty much the PowerPoint portion of our presentation. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, let's get to some fun stuff.
We'll start by taking a look at our point clouds. We use the Scene platform. This was a water treatment plant that was scanned a while back. I think it was about 18 scans. So we're taking a look here now at our VR platform with regards to the point clouds. So we're going to take a look at Scene and visualize the data that was captured through 18 point cloud scans.
So this is a laser scan of a Morse Road pump station for City of Columbus. They scanned obviously the existing conditions. They replaced some pumps. They added some new piping to it. But the M in building information modeling obviously stands for modeling. And so what we need to do is create the existing conditions before we can design the proposed conditions. So this allows us to capture very quickly, literally millions of points of information, all of it with an X, Y, and Z coordinate. In the software here, we can measure between each of the points. We can walk around. It's both a digital information as far as those X, Y, and Z points, but also visual. Instead of pictures, it's basically a living environment that you can occupy and examine. So it's not static. So I think they said that this one was somewhere in the neighborhood of about 20 scans. Typically, you can do roughly 400 square feet per scan, but that varies depending on the complexity. If you look at any one spot, there might be kind of a white area behind it. The laser scans are line of sight, so anything that is obstructed, the laser points can't get behind. And so that's basically blank information, almost like a shadow. So if we needed information that was missing from one, we would move the scanner to a new location and get the items from that side. You may be able to see basically 6-inch spherical targets, which are basically just plastic lamp globes that we got at Home Depot or Lowe's. There are also paper targets that have little black and white squares on them, so 4 squares. Those are easier to tape up and transport through an airport as we go from place to place, so a little bit more portable. But when the software stitches everything together, what it's doing is it's triangulating between all those scan locations or targets and becomes something that's very accurate. So this does almost 1 million scans per second, 1 million points per second. Generally, the scans take anywhere from 3 to 6 minutes, depending if you're black and white or color. In black and white, it will operate in total darkness. So if you had a ceiling area that you had access to, but you couldn't illuminate everything, it would capture that information above the ceiling. switch out of here. All right, so this is in Revit now. This is for basically a blood draw center. They do testing of blood and urine, medical information. And so typically these occupy strip malls. And so what we would do is we would send a team out and do a laser scan of the existing conditions. Once we had that scan processed, we can import it directly into Revit. And then from that, we basically take slices of it so we can see where all the walls are. We can take sections of it so we can see where the floor and ceilings are and recreate all the existing conditions. Then we go in and assign phasing to it. So stuff that would be demoed is removed. And then we can start with a clean shell and start to add the new content. So this is fairly far along. We wouldn't normally add all this detail, but the client had asked for some assistance in putting together materials to help share with their staff. Obviously, they're medical profession. They're not in the architecture or engineering side of things. So looking at plans and elevations and typical drawing sets are a very abstract way of understanding the changes that we were proposing. So the fact that we're building these models virtually, most of the information is already contained in our templates, but adding a little bit more content, which we'll show you here in just a second, really takes it to the next level that they can start to visualize themselves in the space and how they would utilize the spaces. Enscape, basically you just enable, you pick a view that you want to do and you hit start and that will launch it. It runs directly within Revit. So it takes just a minute to launch. And now what you have essentially is a live rendered view of that. So this is all on the fly. Yes, yeah. It's a live link to the model, so I can go back into the Revit, I can change a material, I can add content, I can move something, and it will reprocess it and render it immediately. So there's no lag, it's back and forth. So this is essentially a live rendered view. What's nice about Enscape compared to Lumion, they're fairly equivalent rendering wise, but what we found is Lumion has much better strengths, particularly for the exterior and site tools, vegetation. It's got a more complete library, although Enscape is working on that. But interior wise, it doesn't recognize lights from Revit. So you have to either use proxies or manually place the lights similar to like a Photoshop where you would add lights there. So it's not the fastest process. Go ahead. Okay, so the question was how families are grouped in Enscape, and essentially it's whatever you group them in and however you organize them in Revit. So the Revit families, in this case, a lot of the extra content would never be brought into the construction documents because the building department doesn't care about, you know, a piece of furniture or a piece of a finisher, essentially. So basically we split the model off and then we added the extra content into that only. So it's not part of the regular set, but they are families that we could add into other projects anytime we wanted to. So however you set it up in Revit is however it's represented in Enscape. There's not really any layers or anything, but when you create views, Enscape will remember those view settings. So in one, we have like a bird's eye perspective view, and I can go to that. Try and do this one-handed here. if I go back to the Revit view, I could say bird's eye perspective. And it will turn off the roof and ceilings and switch to an overhead view. I'll have to zoom in here once it starts to render, but oops. Oops. So here you can see that it's basically fully rendered. There's a cut plane in the view settings from Revit that basically tell it to cut everything and not basically hide everything above that cut plane. So you can start to see kind of an overall picture of it, of the space with the finishes and decals. So let me go back and switch it back to the other view. But what was stopping it before, I was trying to force it into a forced two-point perspective, which doesn't work in the bird's eye. You just basically have a single vanishing point. You'll see I have like waiting room alternate. Basically, they wanted a carpet option as well. And let's see. We added some people so we added some people after the views were set up, so they might not be registered within a certain view. So what we were trying to do was, Enscape has, I think about 50 people or so in different poses. We wanted to start populating that. We didn't do that with the official version for the client, but we just wanted to add some visual interest here. Once you actually put the headset on and start to experience the scale, it really is a noticeable difference between what you see in 2D, projected on the wall versus what you see with the goggles. The spaces are much more intimate in the fully immersive environment. Yeah. Yeah. So the question for the recording is that is it more valuable to have an interactive meeting with the client where you can change things on the fly, render it on the fly, and not have to wait for results to be presented and then sent, and then you're past your meeting essentially. So yes, there is a very strong value. We've had meetings with this client where we showed it to them. It's very helpful. These are not people that are skilled technically on the architecture engineering side or the design side. So for them to be able to understand better the things that we're showing them and communicating that with staff through the use of these printouts that they can look at. It's really done a good job of building up the excitement for them to roll stuff out. Their preferred method was PowerPoint slides. So the person was very familiar with PowerPoint, so he'd just put these PowerPoint presentation together and there'd just be static images, and the quality was good for their part, but lacking in terms of communicating everything that they needed to. So we stepped the game up for them, and they're very excited by that. So,
given the amount or the diversity of the engineering platforms and fields that we cover, we do a lot of work for a lot of different facets, and we do a lot of work in water treatment. So we actually had a client come in, and they were very interested in seeing what a view window through an electrical room into their treatment plant looked like. On paper, there's really no way to get a perspective of what you're actually going to get and if that window's in the right spot. They were very adamant that that window was important, which it is. So coming in and putting the headset on and standing in front of that window, in 10 seconds, they're like, good to go. After we moved it a foot. So there's no real way to see that until you kind of see it at one-to-one scale. And the one-to-one scale has been incredibly powerful for us. With the client for the facility that you see here, they actually came in and we had them sit physically in a chair, and then they positioned themselves at one of the blood draw chairs so they can get the perspective from both the client, then as a tech, and then as somebody else that would be entering the space to get a feel for how these spaces are going to operate. And for them, that was super impactful. They were really excited to be able to have that experience, because otherwise you have to wait till it's built. So now they're way ahead of it. And you can change things like materials on the fly. So if they're not comfortable with the floor or wall paint or things like that, you can change those things on the fly, and in a couple of minutes, you know, get your palette lined up. You would change it in Revit. So you're affecting, so like when I talked about moving the window 1 foot, we moved the window 1 foot and all the CDs were done. And they were visualizing it in VR all at the same time.
yes, what we had hoped would work would be to create views. So as you navigate through, it obviously works better on 2 screens, but we're trying to capture everything on one. So there's overlap there. So the question was, how do you track changes between versions when you make edits? And it's a difficulty and a challenge. Even to the point of when you when you get a view that you like in Enscape, there's a button to create a view from that. But in the Revit version of it, it doesn't quite look the same. And so you have to adjust it again. And then it's very difficult getting, I've found, to get the same exact view from iteration to iteration. So ideally what you would do is basically create renderings in a dated folder and then make the changes, and you'd have to do new renderings and try to match it as best as possible. I haven't yet been able to replicate an exact view because the difference between the Revit version of it and the Enscape version of it were slightly different. So it saves them in Revit, not necessarily only in Enscape. So it creates them from Enscape, but saves them into Revit, and then Revit changes them slightly. So maybe a matter of setting up the window properly so that it matches more of your display window in Enscape, if that makes sense. I haven't examined it too closely yet. Yeah. Okay. So which one do you want?
This is Iris VR, this is a platform that offers cardboard pieces, and it also has add-ins for Revit and Navisworks. It'll also load SketchUp and Rhino files. The pros for this one for a greater tool set. You'll So with Iris VR, you gain a tremendous amount of tools, which gains functionality and lets us do things with VR that we weren't doing before, as opposed to just viewing a space, which is really cool, but we want to be able to use this stuff. So with Iris VR, we're able to do room scale models. We can scale them up and down. I'll put the headset on and demonstrate some of these things. These tools were able to have clients come in and do real-time markups, make notes, all in the VR space, able to take measurements, do sun and shadow studies. Probably missing some, but when I put the headset on, I'll try and walk through them all. The caveat to that is it's at a slightly lower visual quality. So it doesn't sound the visual aspect of things in favor of a lot of better tool sets. So that's why we wound up kind of with the Enscape for the high quality and Iris for everything else.
The same way that Revit kind of is a decathlete. There are faster sprinters and farther javelin throwers, but Revit does many things very well. The same way where Iris VR has certain advantages compared to Enscape, and Enscape has advantages and disadvantages. So there's some trade-offs. There's not any one perfect solution yet. They're starting to play well with each other better. And the developments are something that we've been monitoring. I know Iris VR mentioned that they were going to be adding live lights from Revit in their workflow at a future release. And there, Dom is showing a live section.
Spec element, you gather all the BIM data. It's coming directly out of Revit. It's translating all of that information along with it. Select any object, gather its properties directly out of the Revit model. There's a very feature-rich set of markup tools. We can do callouts, calling out across the space. We can do brush with a projected, so I can go graffiti on the wall. Or my personal favorite is the handheld brush, which lets you mark up in 3D space. So I know that you asked the question about kind of capturing all of this content that is done in VR. One thing that this program does that's really nice is allows you to take screenshots while you're in space. Screen grab that, and you can see adding the images and the comments to a report to be exported as a PDF for use outside of the VR. Solar studies.
Yeah. Like I said here, Iris VR doesn't, or the prospect, it doesn't recognize the lights directly from Revit, but it does do environments. Yes, it does work with linked models. It does not recognize the lights directly, nor does it have, it's just ambient light essentially, yeah. One of the things Dom mentioned earlier is basically the focus tracking. So where areas for optimization occur is where your eye doesn't have to be at as high a resolution. So it can save not having to process everything that's outside of your area of focus. I don't think that's in this version yet, but other software gaming engines and things are developing those technologies to optimize it even more. Here he's turning on layers on and off. So if you wanted to do this as a more of a visual guide, you could isolate mechanical ductwork or piping or conduits above the ceiling or concealed areas. It's a faster way, an easier way to kind of navigate around instead of doing a clash detection report out of Navisworks as a possibility. Yes, a paid application. Yes. Enscape is pretty cheap, actually. I think you can rent a monthly license for like $45. So if you only needed it for one project, that'd be great. If you wanted it for a year, I think it's $450 for a standalone version. A network version adds, a little over a couple $100 to that, so $6 something.
But you can have meeting spaces. So just go to a meeting, you create a meeting, two people join, three people, I think it goes up to a couple. You can see each other as little like avatars in the space. You kind of have these collaborative sessions in VR, which is really cool.
Does anybody want to try it out? Just like that, only different. If you're in it for a while, you start to notice more that you're passionate. Some applications, Google Earth has a VR application. It moves rather quickly if you're not careful, and without much warning, you can get 30,000 feet in this big jump. But it is really cool. It's getting very helpful photos meshes. So with your point of view, you pull the trigger partially, you're going to see it merge.
getting much
pull it all the way, you feel it click, you actually jump to that application. Teleport like that through windows to others. Anything that goes orange. If it goes red, it just means you can't teleport to that spot. You have all of the space in the basement to physically walk around it. You're not limited to just stand still. You're probably gonna see that blue grid. So you jump through the doors to get into the space.
Ooh, yeah.
You might land it on a chair.
It's on the whole wall.
You mentioned earlier about having a different point of view of sitting at a demonstration.
Yeah.
Are the goggles picking up your height automatically?
They are. Yeah, so the headset and the handsets are actually calibrated to the floor. So for vertical offset from the floor, finds where the camera height is.
That's true for the Vive or an Oculus, something with external sensors. Like phone-based one, you're gonna kind of, and Windows mixed reality, in my experience, is also shaky.
Yes. Yes. That downgrade in kind of cost and quality is one of the things to experience. It's a little less. I find the handset tracking of Windows is.
I guess if you're calling out, you're smacking your head on
Yeah,
So
I don't know if I'm that tall.
the calibration for the headset you're watching yourself with about 5 months ago. It may just be outside a little while. Yeah, it kind of like drifts a little bit every time it gets unplugged and plugged back in all the time. So it'll drift a little bit.
Basically, there's a fly mode, walk mode, walk mode. Looks a little different.
I find that Enscape seems to, like, your head height seems to get off a little bit easier. Iris is usually pretty spot on. Or feels a lot more.
You also see those red,
Yeah.
So on the screen, you create additional views, somebody would take a point of view.
For
I
that,
understand you take the goggles.
sure.
So they get that way.
So the question was if we did anything different to create a view for somebody that might be in a wheelchair. Yes, we can do that. Yes, you could.
Yeah.
Does anybody else want to try? Any thoughts on the difference? Did you notice between 2D versus occupying it virtually?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely get a better feel for how you can interact with the space. Like if you look out a door, how far you can see down the hall versus just putting a rendering.
What's that? We did a presentation this past week with City of Columbus for the water treatment plant, the pump station, and they're very enthused by it. So from a facility standpoint, they're very interested in it. We showed one where we had added an observation window into the actual pumping room itself, where normally they wouldn't have that. And that just gives them the ability to monitor things even more closely. So they were excited by it. Documents rule, yeah. So the point clouds that we gather are very accurate, literally within a millimeter, within probably 75 feet or so. I mean, so it's very accurate. But there are always places that we can't quite reach, or doors that are locked, or ceilings that are hard without access panels. So there are always the risks of undiscovered conditions and things that it doesn't pick up. We did a survey for another architect of the Grandview High School. So we scanned that. I think it was about almost 400 scans. And then we modeled it basically to a level 200 and then gave them the Revit model for them to actually do all the design work and scope. But because we have it in-house, because we have people with architecture and engineering experience that are actually doing that, as opposed to civil surveyors or surveying companies that are more used to surveying professionally from that aspect of it, that don't have necessarily the architecture or the engineering experience. So it's a little bit of a differentiator. The price has come down, from 6 figures where the scanners were, a few years ago, into the 5 figures and continue to drop. So it's becoming more affordable for firms to start using. They have the BOK 360 is a little bit more portable one from Leica, I believe. We use Faro, and we have different ones for our actual surveying crews that do roads and traffic and stuff, engineering.
So you could walk through it. So it's not like the rendering stops. It's just you're gonna probably do it. If you try walking backwards, a limited amount of buildings. You might be looking at something on a drawing or a screen and it feels really big, and then they'll go inside and they'll be like, oh, so it's a lot smaller than it's saying.
So what we're finding is that obviously there's more and more modeled content from vendors that we can add, but you still have to create a lot of your own content or modify something that you might be able to find online someplace. They're fairly simple parts. We weren't ever using them to schedule anything, but just represent them. It does use Revit's materials and renders them on the fly. Now, Lumion allows you to change materials, but it doesn't communicate those back to Revit. I learned a lot about decals on this project and applying them. And there's some storefront graphics that we can't show because of logos and things, but the way that it shows up, it wouldn't work if you had an outside environment and the light from that was coming through, because it would kind of counteract the decal, until we started to model some of the sidewalks in the parking lot where it had something kind of blocking that. Oh, there it is all of a sudden. So did a lot of workarounds on decals.
Yeah.
We haven't really looked at it. We've heard of it. At Autodesk University last year, there was a lot of information on, Unity and Unreal and those two paths and different factions. It's almost like
they're starting alternative.
life safety code and NFPA and building code and international code.
I was just mentioning that because you guys are talking about the cardboard type stuff. One, QBD in the VR app is about as big as Iris. I know that's a light issue, but the mobile app actually is the one. It actually doesn't, it's not tracking like that, but it does allow you to walk around the model in a similar fashion. And I thought that was kind of interesting that they managed to accomplish that in a reasonable VR environment. Yeah.
So we're past 6:30. If anybody wants to take a try on the headset, we're happy to stay. I again want to thank everybody for coming and for your interest. I want to thank Ann for kind of getting everything started back up again. So look forward to seeing everybody in the next one. Thank you again for coming.